So how do you figure out repairs on a wholesale real estate deal? Stay tuned and I'm going to teach you how I do it. Hey, what's up guys? My name is Graylan Stewart. Thank you for joining me today. So I am a real estate investor and my company focuses on wholesaling real estate. So I get this question pretty often in my DMs and some of the comments on YouTube. People are wanting to know how they actually figure repairs when we're doing our analysis or when you're trying to find the ARV and comp properties and all these different things. But repairs is a huge thing because that's what you're subtracting out to actually get your MAO, which is your maximum allowable offer. Okay, so how do we do repairs? So on my Podio program that we have, our system, I actually have everything built out into my system that actually not only reminds my my acquisition managers to actually get the information, but it also helps them kind of as a quick glance on how they can actually figure out what type of dollar to put on those repairs that are needed. Okay, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about ARV, you're looking for perfect condition homes in like or similar shape, right? Same beds, bath, and etc. But when you're talking about the MAO, your maximum allowable offer, you really have to have the ARV first. Then you're going to multiply that, depending on where you live, between 70 to 85%, because that's the profit that the end buyer is going to make. Then you subtract out your repairs. So you got to know how to figure repairs. Then you subtract out your potential commission, your fee, or your assignment fee. Okay, and then that gives you your maximum allowable offer, and you try to get as low below that max offer as possible, because then you have a bigger spread built in, if that makes sense. Okay, so back to repairs. How do we figure it? So we have in our system, every little thing kind of detailed out, just so my acquisition managers remember to get that information. So, and on top of that, all the questions, or it's not even questions, it's just reminders like flooring condition. Do they have 2 types of flooring, 3 types of flooring? When's the last time it was replaced? Does it need replaced? If it's usually 3 types of flooring or more, obviously we're going to replace it, because ideally, the same flooring throughout the whole house is kind of ideal, which is very rare, but that's how we do it when we have rental properties, and that's how we do our flips in a lot of cases. Sometimes, it's usually a maximum of 2. Typically, we'll do the same hardwood or laminate tile plank throughout the entire house and wet areas. Then we might do carpet in just the bedrooms and sometimes in the living room. But nevertheless, sometimes 3 is sort of common, because you might have actual tile in the wet areas, then the laminate plank everywhere else besides the bedrooms sometimes have carpet. But if it has 3 or more, we typically replace it. If it's been 5 or 6 years, we just factor that in. Okay, is what I'm trying to say. But the major things are the huge price point items that you have to worry about initially. Okay, so you've got foundation is a huge one, right? So we always ask the major questions first. How's the foundation? Your HVAC system, which includes the furnace and AC condenser, the whole system as a package is a HVAC system. Okay. Then we've got plumbing. If it's a 1960 house, has the plumbing ever been replaced? If not, that's something that we're going to replace. So we're factoring that in. So foundation, HVAC, plumbing. We've got the roof. Okay, that's huge. Roofs are expensive. So that's one of the major things. And the 5th major thing is the plumbing, or the electrical. Sorry, I just said plumbing. So the electrical, it's the same thing as plumbing though. When it's 1960, obviously, unless they've upgraded the panel, those kind of things, it's typically just going to be 100% replaced for a couple of reasons. Okay, so the biggest reason is it will never pass inspections if it's that old, because they use the old style knob and tube or all kinds of different older ways of doing electricity, to where that stuff typically won't ever pass current day inspections. So we a lot of times have to replace that, whether we are keeping that as a rental or it's a fix and flipper. Okay. So we just account for that. So those 5 major things, rewind if you need to hear those again, but those are the 5 biggest ticket items. Okay. And now kind of second tier below those is the hot water tank. So there's usually $1,000 to $1,500 depending on where you live and depending on the size of the tank, and how much labor costs, etc. But that's a fairly decent size, expense. And then the flooring is a pretty big one. We typically will just it's different depending on the house and the age, but flooring, depending on the size of the house, is usually $3,000 to $5,000 just automatically. Okay, and that's investor prices a lot of times. But then we've also got the paint. Usually, if a house is older, especially, or even if it's not super old, but usually always have to repaint it. Okay, the interior paint and the exterior paint. A lot of times you have to think about both of those things. Because if it needs a full paint, now it depends if you're getting a handyman to do the work. You got to think about your end buyer. And sometimes if you're brand new, you don't know what they are thinking, right? But if you just think, okay, it's an older house, it's obviously got distress, it needs a new this, and this, and this, then you automatically assume it's probably going to need paint as well, okay? So now that we know all those things, obviously there's also, small cosmetic things, that you can kind of factor in along the way. If it's got pink tile in the bathrooms, you're probably going to have to replace that, right? Because nobody's going to keep that for the rental even, and especially if they flip it, it's definitely not going to fly. Because so you've got 2 different clients. You've got your fix and flippers and you've got your buy and hold people. Okay. So the buy and hold type of client that you are selling to, as a wholesaler, you're selling to buy and hold investors and you're selling to fix and flip investors. Okay. So the buy and hold guys, they typically do something, they don't do a full-blown expensive remodel, right? They do as cheap as possible, but they want it to look nice still. And they do want a permanent fix so that it lasts, a good 10 or 15 years. So they're not making repairs all the time. So they will completely remodel it correctly, but on the cheaper side, right? They're not adding, super nice hardwood floors. They're going to add vinyl laminate plank typically, okay? Because it's a lot cheaper and it looks good and it's really durable. So you got to keep that in mind. But if you're selling a fix and flipper, they're probably going to put a little nicer stuff in the house. So you got 2 clienteles. But we figure our repairs the same no matter what. But when we're actually dispoing the property, we might just put a little extra on the price just to give us a little room, because you never know, a landlord guy might buy it and you can get that price because they typically will pay a little bit more because they're keeping the house, refining it, and getting their money back and all that. Fix and flippers, unknowns and all those different things, they usually want it a little deeper in most instances, in my experience at least, okay? So now that kind of addresses what to ask as far as repairs go. But now let's talk about how we figure the actual repair costs, okay? So those 5 major things, remember what those 5 are. Those we always account for at least $5,000 each, okay? That's just standard, is what we do in my business. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's what we do, and that works. And I've been doing this for 3.5 years now or whatever. And we do a ton of deals, so that works perfect for us. Okay, so why would we factor in $5,000 for foundation? What if it needs foundation all around the property? That's a little different scenario. But if they're saying, yeah, we've got a crack on the outside wall, of the brick, and yeah, there's a couple of doors that won't shut properly because they have cracks on the corners of them, we're going to say $5,000, because usually $5,000 will cover something like that. But if it's major foundation to where the concrete is actually shifting, across the floor in the living room, and there's huge cracks all around the house, then obviously you're going to have a different conversation. That could be upwards to $15,000-$20,000 based on the size of the house. But generally speaking, just normal settling and minor foundation type things, we just factor in $5,000, okay? Now, for the roof, we usually do $5,000. It might only be an 800 square foot house that you could probably get. Well, today's materials are a little higher, but I used to be able to get a 800 square foot house done for about $3,000, $2,500 even. But now materials are higher. It probably is closer to maybe $4,000 these days. But we still just factor in $5,000. even if it's 1,200 square feet. Now keep in mind, most of the homes we deal with, at least in my business, are usually between 800 and 1,500 square feet. Almost always. I would say probably 90% of our deals are between that threshold, 800 to 1,500 square feet. And probably out of those 90%, I would say probably 80% of those are between actually 800 to 1,200. So very few are even 12 to 15, okay? So usually these numbers are pretty spot on. So a new roof is, you're usually pretty safe with $5,000, okay? Now it's the same with the HVAC. Sometimes that's a little higher, obviously, but we do $5,000 for each unit. So let's just say the AC condenser outside is fine, and that's in good working condition, and it's okay. And we just need to replace the furnace because it's old and has issues or whatever. Then we'll say $5,000 for the furnace, okay? But if you need to do both, we'll usually $5,000 for the AC unit as well. Now, usually, if you replace both of these, a HVAC contractor or whatever, you could probably get that done cheaper, $7,500 to $8,000. Like I said, depending on the size of the house, because sometimes you might need to run some new duct working and things like that. So that 5 and 5 kind of will cover all those extra things involved that you may or may not have or need, okay? Because they might have to redo the duct work. Then you're covered if you do 5 for each of those, okay? Now we're talking about plumbing. If you have to replumb a house, usually those older houses have crawl spaces, but even if it's slab or whatever, usually $5,000 will cover replumbing a whole house in the wholesale deals that we're looking at on these off-market deals, 800 to 1,200 typical square footage. Okay. Now same thing with electrical, $5,000. It's kind of what we count. So these 5 major things, if you see a trend here, we just do $5,000, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000. Now keep in mind the HVAC we do separate out. Okay, it's the actual furnace and the AC unit. We'll do 5 for each of those just to make sure we're covered. Okay, because the worst thing you want to do is be one of those newbie wholesalers that are sending deals out at retail because you don't know what you're doing. Okay, so repairs is a huge part of what we do. Okay, you have to factor it in. Now when you're figuring flooring, we typically recommend just $3 to $4 a square foot, depending on where you live. I never pay more than $3 a square foot. I usually get them closer to $2 a square foot with material, labor, everything. But 3 is a pretty safe number, I would say. So if it's 1,000 square foot house and you're going to replace all the flooring, carpet, and laminate, whatever it is, or a mix of it all, we just kind of factor in, $3,000. But at the same time, you never know with material prices going up, and labor actually went up on a lot of things too, in my experience, because we do flip quite a few houses as well. But typically 3 to 5,000 is super safe, but 3,000 I pretty rarely spend more than that on any house, even a little bit larger. So that's usually pretty safe. Now interior and exterior paint. Now this is where you can get really expensive or pretty good deals. Okay. Now, if you're going to hire a professional painting company to come do the inside and outside of the house, you're probably going to spend $10,000 even for a 1,200 square foot house. So I wouldn't recommend that. Obviously, hire a handyman. That kind of will just give you a bid for the job. Now, in my experience, you could probably get away with if you're redoing the entire interior paint. Now, when I say entire interior paint, we always paint all of our walls the same color and all of the trim, including cabinets, white. Okay, so we usually use a light gray on the walls, and it's white trim work and cabinets. So they're redoing, they're sanding and primering the cabinets so that they can repaint over those, and all the trim work, including baseboards, doors, everywhere that has trim, cabinet doors in the hallway, little pantry areas, anything that's trim or considered like a wood color, we always paint white, and then we do gray, light gray on the walls. So I would say a handyman usually will do that for about $2,500 for the whole interior. And then exterior wise, you're looking at about the same, when you're talking handyman, when you have 2 colors on the outside, because we usually do the trim one color, the base of the house the second color. Now, if it's a brick house and all you got to do is the fascia and the soffits and the trim work and a little bit of siding above bricks, that's a little bit different. You might be able to get $1,500 to $2,000 on that. But if it's the whole siding house and that kind of thing, $2,500 to $3,500, somewhere in that range, is pretty typical for us. So that's kind of what we factor in when we're looking at repairs. And then we usually, if it's a pretty distressed house, for example, they've got a couple of the major things that need done, and a lot of these little things like the flooring might need new windows. And we usually factor in about $300 per window. That includes the window and installation. You can usually get that pretty much anywhere around the country, I'm pretty sure. But keep in mind, I flip in Oklahoma City mostly, but I usually pay around $200 to $225 for a window replacement and installation included. So $300 is pretty safe. So if it's got 15 windows, it's a 1960 house, it probably needs new windows. 15 times 300, and there's your actual repair number. Okay. So anyway, back to what I was saying. If it has a couple of the major things, or maybe all of the major things need to be redone and replaced, and then it's got cosmetic things too, then we'll actually tack on another 5 or 10 grand just for miscellaneous and unknown things. It might have a sewer line that you got to replace that you can't see, until you really get into the project pretty deep. Just little things like that pop up. If it's a pretty old and pretty distressed, condition-wise, really bad house, then we'll usually add 5 to 10 grand in repairs based on how bad it is. So that's how you do it. That's how we do it. So we'll take the ARV, depends on where you're at. We'll multiply by between 70 and 85%. Let's just use 75 because that's easy for now. Let's say that ARV is 100 grand. We're going to multiply by 75%. That gives us 75,000. Now let's just say it needed a full HVAC, like AC and furnace. So that's 10 grand. And let's say it needs new flooring at $3 a square foot for a 1,000 square foot house. That's 3,000. So that's 1,300. And let's just say it needs new interior and exterior paint. We'll just call that probably, 7 grand between the two. So I'm at 13 plus 7. That's $20,000. So my 75,000, I'm going to subtract 20,000 now. Now I'm at 55. Now I want to make at least $10,000 on the deal. So that's 45,000 that I need to be at, as sale price. My sales price is 45. So therefore, my sales price, is 45. So if I'm selling it for that, that allows me to make 10 grand. Okay. But if I can get lower than that, then that's even better. You just build yourself in an extra fee. But anyways, hopefully all that made sense repair-wise. So all the major things, as a recap, all the major things, we just kind of consider 5 grand each, okay? And remember the HVAC are 2 different things. So it's really 6 if you factor that in, if you need both, because they're 5 grand a piece. Then flooring, we usually do $3 a square foot, and then, paint interior, if you're talking all trim and cabinets, typically $2,500. Exterior probably closer to $3,500, depending on if it's brick or not. If it's mostly brick, maybe just a couple $1,000. So, and then we add 5 to 10 grand if needed. But if it's a decent shaped house, it didn't need any major things, it's all cosmetic, then we won't even typically add any extra, maybe a grand or two, just to keep us safe. Because you want to have accurate numbers is the whole point. When you're emailing these out or you're talking to cash buyers by text, phone, email, whatever it is, you want them to look at you as a wholesaler that knows what they're doing, right? Because I get deals across my emails all the time that I'm like, this is retail. Nobody's going to pay this, right? And sometimes they'll send them out a little higher, just like we do. But at the same time, a deal's a deal, and you can tell if it's within a few $1,000s of you running your numbers, then you're in the money as far as a buyer goes. So you just got to make sure your numbers are right when you send these out, so that you do right by the seller. For one, you're factoring the numbers correctly for yourself, so you can actually close on this and make a profit. And then for the end buyer themselves, they're going to look at you as a more respectable wholesaler that knows actually what they're doing and how to run their numbers. Okay, so hopefully all that made sense. Drop me some comments if you have any questions, concerns, comments, any kind of information that you want to put in the comments. I always reply, so I'd be glad to answer your questions if you have any. But anyways, I appreciate you sticking around this long. Give me a thumbs up if you haven't already. Please subscribe. I'd love to have you on the channel all the time, and I look forward to talking to you soon. See you later.